The gunshot echoed through the frozen January night before Harrison Shaw even reached his barn, and his hand went instinctively to the Colt at his hip, as his boots crunched through the Wyoming snow that had been falling for 3 days straight. The temperature in Winnemucca had dropped to dangerous levels, forcing him to move his small herd of cattle from the Nevada Territory up to his winter property near the Wyoming border in 1883. And now something or someone had disturbed the fragile peace of his isolated ranch. His breath came out in white clouds as he approached the weathered structure, the lantern in his left hand casting dancing shadows across the drifts that had piled up against the barn doors. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the bite of another storm rolling down from the mountains, and Harrison pulled his coat tighter as he pushed open the heavy door with his shoulder. The horses shifted nervously in their stalls, their eyes rolling white in the lantern light, and Harrison moved carefully between them, checking each animal for signs of injury or distress. Nothing seemed out of place until he reached the back corner where he stored the hay bales, and that was when he heard a soft, desperate whimper that made his blood run cold. He raised the lantern higher and saw her then, a young woman pressed back against the wall behind the hay, her dark hair matted with snow and blood, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from running for your life. She wore only a thin cotton dress that had been torn at the shoulder, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint from the cold. She could not have been out there long, or she would already be dead. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please do not hurt me." Harrison held up his free hand slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate like he would with a spooked horse. "I am not going to hurt you, miss. My name is Harrison Shaw, and this is my barn. You are safe here." She stared at him with those frightened eyes, her whole body trembling from cold and fear, and he could see the bruises forming on her arms where someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. Her feet were bare and bleeding, cut up from running through the snow and rocks, and Harrison felt a surge of anger at whoever had done this to her. He had seen enough cruelty in his 30 years to recognize the aftermath of violence, and this woman had clearly escaped from something terrible. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently, setting the lantern down on a barrel and shrugging out of his heavy coat. He held it out to her, still keeping his distance. "You are freezing. Take this." She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes darting between him and the coat, before she finally reached out with shaking hands and pulled it around her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame, and she clutched it closed like a lifeline. "Emma," she said quietly. "Emma Foster." "Emma," Harrison repeated, and he kept his voice low and steady. "I need to get you inside the house where it is warm. You have frostbite starting on your fingers and toes, and if we do not get you warmed up properly, you could lose them. Will you let me help you?" She looked at him for another long moment, and he could see her weighing her options, trying to decide if he was another threat or possibly the salvation she desperately needed. Finally, she gave a small nod, and Harrison moved closer, offering his arm for support. She took it, and he could feel how badly she was shaking as she tried to stand. Her legs nearly gave out, and he caught her instinctively, lifting her into his arms before she could protest. "I have got you," he said. "I promise I am going to keep you safe." Emma did not respond, but she did not fight him either, and Harrison carried her out of the barn and through the snow to his house. The wind had picked up, driving the snow sideways, and he moved as quickly as he could while being careful not to jostle her too much. The warmth of the house hit them as soon as he kicked the door open, and he carried her straight to the fireplace where the coals were still glowing red. He set her down carefully in his own chair and immediately set about building up the fire, adding logs until the flames roared back to life. "We need to warm you up slowly," he explained, grabbing blankets from his bedroom and wrapping them around her. Too fast and it will damage your tissue. I am going to make you some warm tea and then I need to look at those feet. Emma nodded, still not speaking, and Harrison moved to the kitchen area of his small cabin. It was a simple place, just 2 rooms with a loft for sleeping, but it was solid and warm and safe, and right now that was all that mattered. He put water on to boil and gathered what medical supplies he had: clean cloth, whiskey for disinfecting, and the salve his mother had taught him to make from pine pitch and bear fat. When he returned to Emma, she was staring into the fire with hollow eyes, and he could see tears tracking down her dirty cheeks. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling beside the chair, "I need you to drink this tea when it is ready, and then I need to clean those cuts on your feet. It is going to hurt, but infection is worse. Do you understand?" She turned to look at him, and for the first time he got a good look at her face. She was younger than he had first thought, probably only 22 or 23, with delicate features and dark eyes that would have been beautiful if they had not been so filled with pain and fear. There was dried blood at her temple where something had struck her, and more bruises were forming on her jaw. Whoever had done this had meant to hurt her badly. "He will find me," she whispered. "He always finds me." Harrison sat back on his heels, feeling that anger flare again in his chest. "Who will find you, my husband?" The word came out like poison. "Marcus Foster. He owns the saloon in Winnemucca and half the men in town work for him. I tried to leave before and he brought me back, beat me so badly I could not walk for a week." She pulled the blanket tighter. "This time he said he would kill me. Said he was tired of me embarrassing him by trying to run away. So I waited until he was drunk and I ran. I just ran." Harrison felt his jaw tighten. He knew Marcus Foster by reputation, a man who had come to Winnemucca 3 years ago with money and ambition, buying up properties and people with equal ease. Harrison had never done business with him, preferring to keep to himself up at his ranch, but he had heard the stories. Foster was the kind of man who thought money made him untouchable, and apparently he thought it gave him the right to abuse his wife. "How long have you been running?" Harrison asked. "Since yesterday evening. I made it to the stage road, but there was no one coming because of the storm. I tried to keep walking, but I got turned around in the snow, and then I saw your barn." She looked at him with those haunted eyes. "I heard you coming and I thought it was him. I thought he had found me already." Harrison reached out slowly and took her hand, being careful of her damaged fingers. "Marcus Foster is not going to hurt you again, Emma. I give you my word on that. You are under my protection now, and I do not break my promises." Something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in the armor of fear, and she squeezed his hand weakly. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Harrison said simply, "and because no one deserves what he did to you." The tea kettle began to whistle, and Harrison gently released her hand to prepare the tea, adding honey to help her regain some strength. He brought it to her and watched as she wrapped her hands around the warm cup, wincing at the pain but drinking gratefully. While she sipped, he knelt down and carefully examined her feet. The cuts were bad but not as deep as he had feared, and he worked methodically to clean them with warm water and whiskey, ignoring her gasps of pain as he worked. He applied the salve and wrapped them in clean bandages, then did the same for her hands. "You need food and rest," he said when he finished. "When did you last eat?" Emma thought for a moment. 2 days ago, I think. Marcus locked me in the bedroom after I dropped a bottle of his whiskey. He said I did not deserve to eat until I learned to be more careful." Harrison felt his hands curl into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would not help Emma right now. Instead, he went to the kitchen and prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried beef, along with some canned beans he heated over the stove. It was not fancy, but it was nourishing, and Emma ate like she was starving, which she probably was. As she ate, Harrison studied her more carefully. Beneath the dirt and bruises and fear, he could see strength in the set of her jaw, determination in the way she held herself despite everything she had been through. She was a survivor, and that spoke of a spirit that had not been broken despite Marcus Foster's best efforts. There was something else, too, something that made Harrison's chest tighten in an unfamiliar way, a vulnerability that made him want to protect her, to stand between her and every bad thing in the world. When she finished eating, Emma looked at him with exhausted eyes. "What happens now?" "Now you rest," Harrison said. "You can take my bed upstairs in the loft. I will sleep down here by the fire. In the morning, when you are stronger, we will figure out what to do about your husband." "He will come looking for me," Emma said again, and the fear was back in her voice. "He has men who work for him. Dangerous men. If they find me here, they will hurt you too." "Let them try," Harrison said, and there was steel in his voice. "I have dealt with dangerous men before, Emma. I was a deputy marshal for 5 years before I bought this ranch. I know how to protect what is mine." "I am not yours," Emma said, but there was no heat in it, just exhaustion. "You are under my protection," Harrison corrected gently. "That makes you mine to defend. Now come on, let me help you to the bed before you fall asleep in that chair." He helped her up the ladder to the loft, supporting her weight as she climbed, and settled her into his bed with several thick quilts piled on top. She was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion and trauma of the past 2 days. Harrison stood there for a moment, watching her sleep, and felt that strange tightness in his chest again. He barely knew this woman, but something about her had already gotten under his skin, past the walls he had built after his wife died 5 years ago in childbirth, taking their son with her. He climbed back down the ladder and added more wood to the fire, then checked his rifle and revolver, making sure both were loaded and ready. If Marcus Foster did come looking for his wife, Harrison would be ready. He settled into the chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap, and waited for dawn. The storm continued through the night, howling around the cabin and piling snow against the walls, and Harrison dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. But nothing disturbed them, and when gray light finally filtered through the windows, he stood and stretched, his back protesting from a night in the chair. He built up the fire and started coffee, then prepared a proper breakfast of eggs and bacon and biscuits. The smell of cooking food eventually brought Emma down from the loft, moving slowly and carefully on her bandaged feet. "Good morning," Harrison said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Emma admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But better than I expected." "Thank you for everything you did last night. You saved my life." "You saved your own life by having the courage to run," Harrison said, setting a plate of food in front of her. "I just gave you a safe place to land." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Harrison found himself watching her, noting the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the delicate strength in her hands as she held her coffee cup. She was beautiful, he realized, even battered and bruised. Or maybe especially so, because those wounds spoke of a battle fought and survived. "I need to tell you something," Emma said finally, setting down her fork. "About Marcus, about why he is the way he is." Harrison nodded, giving her his full attention. "He was not always cruel," Emma continued, her voice soft. "When we met 2 years ago in Denver, he was charming and generous. My father had just died, leaving me with nothing, and Marcus seemed like an answer to my prayers. He courted me properly, made all the right promises, and I married him thinking I would be safe." She laughed bitterly. "I was so naive." "What changed?" Harrison asked. I did not get pregnant, Emma said bluntly. Marcus wanted sons to carry on his name, to inherit his empire. Every month that passed without a baby, he got angrier. He started drinking more, gambling more, and taking his frustrations out on me. At first, it was just words, cruel things about how I was defective, how I could not even do the one thing women were supposed to do. Then it became pushes and slaps. Then worse. Harrison felt his jaw clench, but he kept his voice calm. Did you tell anyone? Go to the law. The sheriff in Winnemucca is in Marcus's pocket, Emma said. He was at the house for dinner once when Marcus hit me. He just laughed and said wives needed discipline sometimes. And the doctor Marcus brought to examine me told me it was my duty to submit to my husband in all things. She looked at Harrison with eyes that had seen too much. There was no one to help me, so I decided to help myself. You were right to run, Harrison said firmly. And you were right to keep running until you found someone who would help you. I meant what I said last night, Emma. I am going to keep you safe. But for how long? Emma asked. Marcus will not stop looking for me. He sees me as his property, something he bought and paid for with a marriage license. And even if he never finds me, what kind of life can I have? I am a married woman. I cannot get a divorce without his consent, and he will never give it. I cannot work most jobs or own property or do anything without being Mrs. Marcus Foster. Harrison leaned back in his chair, thinking. She was right, of course. The law in 1883 was not kind to women, especially married women trying to escape their husbands. But he had not survived 5 years as a deputy marshal and 3 years alone on this ranch by giving up when things got difficult. We will find a way, he said. But first, we need to make sure you are safe in the immediate term. The storm is still going strong, which means Foster and his men cannot get up here easily even if they know where to look. That gives us time to plan. Plan what? Emma asked. Your future, Harrison said simply. There are options. I know people in California, in Oregon, even up in Montana. Places where Marcus Foster's money and influence do not reach. We can get you somewhere safe, set up with a new identity, a new life. Emma stared at him. You would do that for me. Help me disappear completely, if that is what you want, Harrison said. Or there are other options. But we do not have to decide everything right now. For today, you rest and heal. Let me worry about keeping watch. The storm continued for 2 more days, trapping them in the cabin together, and Harrison found himself grateful for the forced isolation. It gave Emma time to recover, both physically and emotionally, and it gave him time to get to know her. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their lives. Emma told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a bookkeeper who loved literature and music, and how she had ended up in Denver after her father's death, desperate and vulnerable and easy prey for a man like Marcus Foster. Harrison told her about his own past, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, joining the army during the last years of the Civil War, and then working as a lawman because he did not know what else to do with himself. He told her about Sarah, his wife, and how losing her and their son had nearly destroyed him, how he had bought this ranch and isolated himself because it hurt less than trying to live in the world without them. I have not talked to anyone like this in 5 years, Harrison admitted on the 3rd night as they sat by the fire with the wind howling outside. I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to. I know what you mean, Emma said softly. Marcus never talked to me, not really. He talked at me, gave me orders, told me what I was doing wrong. But he never asked me what I thought or felt or wanted. I forgot I had opinions that mattered. They matter, Harrison said, and he reached over and took her hand without thinking about it. Her fingers curled around his, and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, and bright sunlight flooded through the windows, reflecting off the snow until everything was painfully bright. Harrison went out to check on the animals and clear paths through the drifts, and when he came back in, Emma had cleaned the cabin and prepared lunch from his supplies. She moved carefully, still healing, but there was color in her cheeks now and determination in her eyes. "We need to talk about what happens next," she said as they ate. "I cannot hide here forever, and you have a life to get back to." "My life can wait," Harrison said. "But you are right, we need a plan. The question is, what do you want, Emma?" "If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. "I want to be free," she said finally. "I want to wake up in the morning without being afraid. I want to make my own choices, live my own life. I want to matter, to be more than just someone's property." "You already are more than that," Harrison said. "You are brave and strong and smart. You just need the chance to show it." "Will you help me?" Emma asked, turning to look at him. "Will you help me get free from Marcus, really free, so I can start over?" Harrison met her eyes, seeing the hope there, the desperate need to believe that freedom was possible, and he knew he would do whatever it took to make that happen. "Yes," he said simply. "I will help you." They spent the rest of the day planning. Harrison knew a lawyer in Cheyenne, a good man who had worked with him on several cases when he was a marshal. If anyone could find a legal way to free Emma from her marriage, it would be him. But getting to Cheyenne meant traveling, which meant the risk of being seen and recognized. They would have to be careful. "We will wait a few more days," Harrison decided. "Give you more time to heal and let the roads clear a bit. Then we will make for Cheyenne. It is about 100 miles from here, maybe a week of travel if the weather holds." "What if Marcus finds us before then?" Emma asked. "Then I will deal with him," Harrison said, and there was no room for argument in his tone. "But I do not think he will. This ranch is remote, and I do not advertise my presence. Most people in Winnemucca do not even know I exist. As long as we are careful, we should be safe." That night, as Harrison lay in his bedroll by the fire and listened to Emma breathing softly in the loft above, he found himself thinking about the future in a way he had not done in years. For so long, his world had been reduced to survival, get through the day, tend the animals, endure the loneliness. But Emma had changed something in him, woken something he thought had died with Sarah. He cared about what happened to her, cared more than he probably should for someone he had known less than a week. The days passed peacefully. Harrison taught Emma to shoot, figuring she should know how to defend herself if it came to that. She was a quick learner, steady and focused, and within a few days, she could hit a target at 20 yards more often than not. He also showed her how to ride, since she would need that skill for the journey to Cheyenne. She was nervous around the horses at first, but she pushed through her fear with the same determination she showed in everything else. And soon she was able to saddle and ride Harrison's gentle mare without assistance. In the evenings, they continued to talk, and Harrison found himself looking forward to those conversations more than anything else. Emma was intelligent and well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and she challenged him in ways he had not been challenged in years. She made him laugh, too, with stories of her childhood misadventures and her dry observations about life in the West. And sometimes, in the firelight, he would catch her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read, something soft and uncertain and hopeful. On the 10th day after Emma had arrived, Harrison was outside chopping wood when he heard horses approaching. He immediately set down the axe and drew his revolver, moving to a position where he could see the path leading to the cabin without being easily seen himself. 3 men rode into view, tough-looking characters with guns on their hips and hard eyes that scanned the property with professional thoroughness. Harrison recognized the lead man, Jake Thornton, one of Marcus Foster's enforcers, known for being quick with a gun and brutal in a fight. Harrison stepped out into view, his revolver held casually but ready. "This is private property, gentlemen. State your business." Thornton reined in his horse, looking Harrison up and down with a sneer. "We are looking for a woman. Dark hair, about 5'4", probably injured. She ran away from her husband about 10 days ago, and we have been tracking her through the territory. Trail led us this way. Have not seen anyone matching that description," Harrison said evenly. "As you can see, I am alone up here. Mind if we look around?" Thornton asked, but it was not really a question. His men were already starting to dismount. Harrison cocked his revolver, and the sound was loud in the quiet air. "Actually, I do mind. Like I said, this is private property and you are not welcome here." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "You do not want to make an enemy of Marcus Foster, friend. He is a powerful man, and he does not take kindly to people interfering with his business. And I do not take kindly to people refusing to leave my property when asked," Harrison replied. "So here is how this is going to work. You are going to get back on those horses and ride out of here. And if I see you on my land again, I will assume you mean me harm and respond accordingly." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, and Harrison could feel the tension coiling tight, ready to explode into violence. He was outnumbered, but he had the advantage of position and the element of surprise if it came to shooting, and he was willing to bet he was faster than any of them. Finally, Thornton smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Have it your way, friend. But you should know that Marcus Foster always gets what belongs to him. Always." He turned his horse. "Let us go, boys. We have got other places to check." Harrison watched them ride away, not lowering his gun until they were out of sight. Then he hurried back to the cabin where Emma was waiting by the window, her face pale. "They are looking for me," she said. "They know I came this way." "They suspect," Harrison corrected, "but they do not know for sure. Still, it means we need to leave sooner than I planned. We will go tonight, as soon as it is dark. Pack light, just what you can carry on horseback." Emma nodded, already moving to gather her few belongings. Harrison went to the loft and pulled up a loose floorboard, revealing a small cache of money and papers he kept hidden there. It was his emergency fund, money he had saved from his martial days and never touched. He counted out half of it and put it in a pouch with Emma's name on it. "If something happens to me," he said, handing it to her, "you take this and get to Cheyenne. The address of that lawyer I mentioned is written on this paper. Give him this money and tell him I sent you. He will help you." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Emma said firmly, but she took the pouch and tucked it into her coat pocket. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the journey. Harrison packed supplies for 2 weeks on the trail, along with extra ammunition and weapons. He saddled both horses and loaded their gear, then made a final circuit of the property, checking for any signs that Thornton and his men might be watching. He saw nothing, but that did not mean they were not out there. As dusk fell, Harrison and Emma mounted up and rode out, taking a route that led north into the mountains rather than south toward the main roads. It would be harder traveling, especially in winter, but it would also be harder to track them. They rode in silence for the first few hours, pushing the horses as hard as they dared on the snowy trails, and it was only when they were miles from the cabin that Harrison finally allowed them to slow to a walk. "How are you holding up?" he asked Emma. "I am fine," she said, though he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "How far do we go tonight?" "There is a line shack about 10 miles from here," Harrison said. "It is not much, but it will be shelter for the night. We will rest there and then push on to Cheyenne in the morning." They reached the line shack well after dark. a tiny one-room structure that Harrison had built years ago for use during the spring roundup. It was cold and dusty, but it was out of the wind, and there was a small stove that Harrison soon had glowing with warmth. They ate a cold dinner of jerky and hardtack, too tired to prepare anything more elaborate, and then settled in for the night. Harrison spread out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the small space, but as he lay there trying to sleep, he heard Emma crying softly. He hesitated for only a moment before getting up and moving to her side. "Emma, what is wrong?" "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her tears. "I am just so tired of running, tired of being afraid, and I keep thinking about what will happen if Marcus catches us. He will kill you, Harrison. He will kill you for helping me, and I could not bear that." Harrison sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms without thinking, holding her while she cried against his chest. "He is not going to catch us," he said firmly. "And even if he did, I can take care of myself. I have been in tight spots before, Emma. I know how to survive." "But why?" Emma asked, pulling back to look at him. "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me. You could have just sent me on my way that first night, but instead you took me in. You are risking everything to help me." "Why?" Harrison looked at her, at this brave, broken, beautiful woman who had stumbled into his life and turned it upside down, and he knew the answer even if he was not quite ready to say it out loud. "Because you matter," he said instead. "Because you deserve better than what you have had. And because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." Emma stared at him, her eyes searching his face in the dim light from the stove, and then she did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative and sweet. Harrison froze for a heartbeat, and then he was kissing her back, his hand coming up to cup her face as years of loneliness and grief melted away in the warmth of her lips. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Emma rested her forehead against his. "I am still married," she whispered. "This is wrong." "Nothing about this feels wrong to me," Harrison said quietly, "but I will not push you into something you are not ready for. We can wait, Emma. We have time." "Do we?" Emma asked. "What if we do not make it to Cheyenne? What if this is all the time we have?" "Then we will make the most of it," Harrison said. "But I believe we are going to make it. I believe you are going to be free, and we are going to have all the time in the world." Emma smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face. "When did you become such an optimist?" "About 10 days ago," Harrison said, and he kissed her again. They did not sleep together that night, but they did sleep close. Emma curled against Harrison's side with his arm around her, and it was the best sleep either of them had had in weeks. When morning came, they ate a quick breakfast and set out again, following narrow mountain trails that only someone who knew the country could navigate. The going was slow and treacherous, but Harrison knew every inch of this territory, and he was confident they could make it to Cheyenne without being seen. On the third day of travel, they came down out of the mountains and into the high plains, and Harrison began to relax slightly. They had covered a lot of ground and seen no signs of pursuit. Maybe Thornton had given up, or maybe he had gone back to Winnemucca to report failure. Either way, it looked like they might actually make it. That night, they camped beside a frozen creek, and Harrison shot a rabbit for dinner. It was their first hot meal in days, and they ate gratefully, huddled close to the fire against the bitter cold. The sky was clear and filled with stars, and Emma leaned against Harrison's shoulder as they watched the heavens wheel overhead. "Tell me about your wife," Emma said softly. "You mentioned her once, but you never talk about her." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and Emma started to apologize for asking, but he shook his head. "No, it is all right. I should talk about her. Her name was Sarah, and she was the prettiest girl in our county back in Missouri. I loved her from the time I was 15 years old, and I counted myself the luckiest man alive when she agreed to marry me." He paused, staring into the fire. "She was sweet and kind and patient with me, even when I was young and stupid and thought I knew everything. When the war ended and I came home, she was waiting for me, and we got married that same week." "What happened to her?" Emma asked gently. "She got pregnant 2 years after we married, and we were both so happy. We were going to have a son," the midwife said. "But something went wrong during the birth. The baby was turned the wrong way, and Sarah bled too much. She died holding our son, and he died a few hours later." Harrison's voice was rough with old pain. "I buried them together under an oak tree on the farm, and then I left. I could not stay there with all those memories, so I became a marshal and tried to forget." "Did you?" "Forget, I mean." "No," Harrison said. "You do not forget something like that. You just learn to carry it. But I stopped living, Emma. I went through the motions of being alive, but I was not really there anymore. Not until you showed up in my barn, scared and freezing and needing help. And suddenly, I had a reason to get up in the morning again, a reason to care what happened next." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am glad I found you, Harrison Shaw." "I am glad you found me too," Harrison said, and he kissed her again, longer this time, pouring all the emotion he had kept locked away for 5 years into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was crying, but she was smiling too. "I love you," she said, and the words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised him. "I know it is too soon, and I know nothing about this makes sense, but I love you. You make me feel safe and seen and valued, and I have never had that before. Even when I thought I loved Marcus, it was nothing like this." Harrison's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. "I love you too," he said, and it was the truth, as clear and simple as sunrise. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, but you changed everything, Emma. You made me want to live again." They held each other close that night, sharing warmth and comfort and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream of before. And when morning came, they rode on toward Cheyenne with renewed purpose, no longer running away from something but running toward something better. They reached Cheyenne on a cold February afternoon, riding into town dusty and tired but triumphant. Harrison led them straight to the office of Daniel Morgan, the lawyer he had mentioned, a distinguished man in his 50s with gray hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Emma's story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper, and when she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is complicated," he said finally. "Divorce law varies by territory, but in general, you would need to prove adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty. The first two do not apply here, but the third might. Do you have any witnesses to your husband's abuse?" Emma shook her head. "He was always careful to do it in private. And the few people who did see the doctor, the sheriff, they did not care." "What about physical evidence? Scars, medical records, anything that could document the abuse?" "I have scars," Emma said quietly. "Lots of them," Morgan nodded. "That is a start, but I will be honest with you, Mrs. Foster. Even with evidence, this is going to be an uphill battle. Marcus Foster has money and influence, and judges are generally reluctant to grant divorces, especially when the woman is the one asking for it. The law still sees wives as property in many ways. So there is nothing we can do." Harrison asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I did not say that," Morgan replied. "There is another option, though it is more extreme. If you were to travel to California, specifically to San Francisco, you could file for divorce there under California's more progressive laws. The state grants divorces for cruelty, and they are more willing to believe women who testify about abuse. It would take time, maybe 6 months to a year, but you would have a much better chance of succeeding." Emma looked at Harrison, and he could see the hope warring with fear in her eyes. "California is so far away." "It is," Harrison agreed. "But if that is what it takes to set you free, then that is what we will do." Morgan cleared his throat. "There is one more thing you should know. If you go to California and file for divorce, Marcus Foster will be notified. He will have the opportunity to contest it, and he likely will. That means you will need to stay in California for the duration of the proceedings, which means he will know where to find you." "I will be there to protect her," Harrison said firmly. Morgan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you will. All right, here is what I recommend. You head to San Francisco and establish residency there. You will need to live in the state for at least 6 months before you can file for divorce. In the meantime, I will gather what evidence I can regarding Foster's character and business dealings. If we can prove he is not the upstanding citizen he claims to be, it will help your case. And Mr. Shaw, you should probably marry Miss Foster once the divorce is final." Emma blushed, but Harrison just smiled. "That is my intention, Mr. Morgan." They left the lawyer's office with a plan and a sense of purpose. Harrison used some of his remaining money to buy supplies for the long journey to California, including warmer clothes for Emma and a good rifle for himself. They also bought train tickets to take them as far as Sacramento, which would cut weeks off their travel time and make it harder for Marcus Foster to track them. The train journey was long but relatively comfortable, and Emma spent the time staring out the window at the passing landscape, watching as the snow-covered plains gave way to mountains, and then to the fertile valleys of California. Harrison watched her more than he watched the scenery, noting the way her face lit up when she saw something new, the way she laughed at the antics of a child a few seats away, the way she relaxed more with every mile they put between themselves and Wyoming. They reached Sacramento in late February and caught a riverboat down to San Francisco, arriving in the bustling city in early March of 1883. The city was unlike anything Emma had ever seen, a sprawling metropolis of wooden buildings and steep hills, with ships crowding the harbor and people of every nationality filling the streets. It was loud and chaotic and exciting, and Emma loved it immediately. Harrison found them a small apartment in a respectable neighborhood, using the last of his savings to pay for 3 months' rent in advance. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was clean and safe and theirs. Emma stood in the middle of the main room and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in, and then she threw her arms around Harrison's neck and kissed him. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For saving me, for bringing me here, for giving me a chance at a new life. I will never be able to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Harrison said, holding her close. "Just be happy. That is all I want." They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Harrison found work on the docks, loading and unloading ships, while Emma took in sewing to help make ends meet. The work was hard, but they were together, and that made everything bearable. In the evenings, they would walk along the waterfront or explore the city's many neighborhoods, and slowly Emma began to bloom like a flower after rain. The fear left her eyes, replaced by joy and confidence, and she started to talk about the future with excitement rather than dread. 6 months after arriving in San Francisco, Emma filed for divorce from Marcus Foster on the grounds of extreme cruelty. She had to testify before a judge about the abuse she had suffered, showing the scars on her arms and back, and it was one of the hardest things she had ever done. But Harrison was there beside her, holding her hand, and that gave her strength. The judge, a stern-faced man named Henderson, listened to her testimony carefully, and then granted a trial date for September. Marcus Foster did indeed contest the divorce, sending his own lawyer to San Francisco to argue that Emma was a lying, unfaithful wife who had abandoned her duties. But Daniel Morgan, who had traveled to California to represent Emma, had done his homework. He presented evidence of Foster's gambling debts, his violent temper, and testimony from several women in Winnemucca who claimed Foster had assaulted them as well. The trial lasted 3 days, and when it was over, Judge Henderson granted Emma her divorce, ruling that Marcus Foster was an unfit husband who had violated the sanctity of his marriage through cruelty and abuse. Emma wept when the verdict was read, and Harrison held her while she cried tears of relief and joy. After 5 years of being trapped in a nightmare marriage, she was finally free. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright September sunshine, and Emma turned her face up to the sky and laughed. "I am free," she said. "I am actually free." "You are," Harrison agreed, and he dropped to one knee right there on the courthouse steps, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "And now I have a question for you. Emma Foster, well, Emma Forrester, since you took back your maiden name, will you marry me?" Emma stared at him, her hand over her mouth, and then she nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Harrison slipped the ring on her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while people on the street stopped to watch and smile. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at a church near their apartment, with Daniel Morgan serving as their witness and a handful of friends they had made in San Francisco in attendance. Emma wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Harrison wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her like his life depended on it. They spent their wedding night in their small apartment, and it was everything Emma had dreamed of, and nothing like her first wedding night with Marcus Foster. Harrison was gentle and patient and loving, treating her like she was precious and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Emma felt truly safe for the first time in years. They lived in San Francisco for another year, saving money and building a life together. Harrison worked his way up from dock worker to foreman, and Emma started a small dressmaking business from their apartment that grew steadily as word spread about her skill with a needle. They were happy, truly happy, but both of them missed the open spaces of the West, the wide skies and endless horizons that had been home. In the spring of 1884, they received a letter from Daniel Morgan. Marcus Foster had died of a heart attack brought on by heavy drinking and years of excess. His estate had been sold to cover his debts, and there was nothing left. The news should have brought Emma satisfaction or relief, but instead she just felt sad for the waste of it all, for what Foster could have been if he had chosen differently. "He did not have to be that way," she said to Harrison that evening as they sat on their apartment's small balcony watching the sun set over the bay. "He could have been a good man, a kind man, but he chose cruelty instead, and it destroyed him." "His choices were his own," Harrison said gently. "You cannot blame yourself for what he became." "I do not," Emma said. "I just wish things could have been different, but I am grateful for where I am now for you, for us." "Me too," Harrison said, taking her hand, "and I have been thinking, what would you say to going back to Wyoming? Not to Winnemucca, but somewhere nearby. I have been saving money, and I think we have enough to buy a small ranch, start over fresh. We could raise cattle, maybe some horses, build a real home." Emma's eyes lit up. "Could we really do that?" "We can do anything we want," Harrison said. "We are free, Emma, both of us. So the question is, what do we want our future to look like?" "I want a home," Emma said immediately. "A real home with you. I want children if we are blessed with them." "I want to grow old with you, Harrison. watching the sun rise over the mountains every morning and knowing that I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Harrison pulled her into his arms and kissed her. "Then that is what we will have." They left San Francisco in June of 1884, taking the train east with their belongings packed into 2 large trunks. They stopped in Cheyenne to visit Daniel Morgan and thank him again for his help, and then they continued north into Wyoming. Harrison had been corresponding with a rancher near Sheridan who was looking to sell his property, and when they saw it, they both knew immediately that it was meant to be theirs. The ranch sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, with a stream running through the property and good grazing land for cattle. The house was small but solid, built of logs with a stone fireplace and a wide front porch that looked out over the valley. There was a good barn and several outbuildings, and the price was reasonable enough that Harrison could afford it with the money they had saved. They bought the ranch and moved in immediately, spending the summer fixing it up and making it truly theirs. Emma planted a garden and sewed curtains for the windows, while Harrison repaired fences and bought a small herd of cattle to get started. They worked from dawn to dusk, but it never felt like work because they were building something together, creating a future that belonged only to them. In the fall, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening after dinner, her eyes shining with joy and a little bit of fear, and he swept her into his arms and held her tight, overwhelmed with emotion. After everything they had been through, after all the pain and loss and struggle, they were being given this gift, this chance to create new life and new hope. "We are going to be parents," Emma said, laughing through her tears. "Can you believe it?" "I can," Harrison said. "Because we deserve this, Emma. We deserve happiness and peace and a family, and I promise you I am going to be the best husband and father I can be." Their daughter was born in May of 1885, a healthy baby with dark hair like her mother and green eyes like her father. They named her Sarah, after Harrison's first wife, and Emma insisted on it, saying that Sarah should be remembered and honored as part of their family. The birth was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Harrison was afraid he was going to lose Emma the way he had lost Sarah. But Emma was strong and stubborn, and she fought her way through. And when he finally held his wife and daughter together, he wept with relief and gratitude. They raised Sarah with love and laughter, teaching her to ride and raid and respect the land they lived on. Emma proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing, and Harrison loved watching her with their daughter, seeing the joy in her face as Sarah learned and grew. They had more children over the years, a son they named Daniel after the lawyer who had helped them, and another daughter they called Margaret after Emma's mother, and their house filled with noise and chaos and love. The ranch prospered under Harrison's management, and they gradually expanded their herd and their land holdings, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. They made friends with their neighbors, hosted barn dances and Sunday dinners, and became pillars of the small community that grew up around them. Emma started a library in their home, lending books to anyone who wanted to read, and she taught several of the local women to read and write, something she considered one of her proudest achievements. Years passed, peaceful and productive, and Harrison often thought about that cold January night when Emma had stumbled into his barn, scared and hurting and desperate. He thought about how one moment of choosing to help, one decision to do the right thing, had changed both their lives completely. He thought about all the things that could have gone wrong. Foster could have found them. The divorce might not have been granted. They might never have found this ranch, but somehow everything had worked out. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison and Emma stood on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard. Sarah was 9 now, tall and confident, helping her younger siblings build a fort out of hay bales. Daniel was 7, adventurous and fearless, and Margaret was 5, sweet and shy but with her mother's inner strength. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had not found me that night?" Emma asked, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. "All the time," Harrison admitted. "And every time I thank God that I was there, that I could help you, that we found each other. You changed my life, Emma. You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to hope. I will never stop being grateful for that." "I am the one who should be grateful," Emma said. "You saved me, Harrison. Not just my life, but my soul. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real partnership is supposed to be. You gave me freedom and family and a future. You gave me everything." Harrison turned to look at her, this woman he loved more than life itself, and he saw not the scared girl from the barn but a strong, confident woman who knew her own worth. "We gave each other everything," he said, "and we are going to keep giving it to each other for the rest of our lives." As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Harrison and Emma kissed, surrounded by the sound of their children's laughter and the peace they had built together. They had traveled a long, hard road to get here, but it had been worth every step because it had led them to each other, and to this moment, and to the life they had created together. The years continued to be kind to them. Harrison's cattle operation became one of the most respected in Wyoming, known for the quality of their stock and the fairness with which Harrison conducted business. Emma's library grew until they had to build a separate building to house all the books, and it became a gathering place for the community, somewhere people came not just to read, but to learn and connect with others. She taught reading classes for adults and children alike, and more than one person credited her with changing their life by teaching them to read. Their children grew up strong and healthy. Sarah inherited her mother's intelligence and love of learning, eventually becoming a teacher herself in the small school that opened in their town. Daniel took after his father, loving the ranch and the work of raising cattle, and by the time he was 16, he was running much of the day-to-day operations alongside Harrison. Margaret showed an early talent for art, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the landscape and the animals and the people around her, and Emma encouraged her creativity, making sure she had supplies and time to develop her gift. When Harrison was 50 years old and Emma was 43, they became grandparents for the first time when Sarah married a young lawyer from Cheyenne and gave birth to twin boys. Harrison held those babies in his arms and felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way possible. He had lost a son once, long ago, and the pain of that loss had nearly destroyed him. But now he held his grandsons and knew that life was about more than just surviving loss. It was about having the courage to love again, to open your heart even knowing it could be broken, because the alternative was to live half a life, and that was no life at all. Emma felt the same joy, watching her daughter with her own children, seeing the love and confidence Sarah showed as a mother, and knowing that she had broken the cycle of abuse and fear that could have been passed down. Her children would never know what it was like to live in fear of the person who was supposed to love them most. They would grow up knowing they were valued and cherished, and they would pass that knowledge on to their own children, and that legacy was worth more than any amount of money or property. Harrison and Emma celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, with a party that lasted 2 days and included half the county. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army, and through it all, Harrison and Emma moved together like they had been one person all along, finishing each other's sentences and sharing private smiles that spoke of 20 years of shared joy and struggle and love. "I would do it all again," Emma said to Harrison that night as they lay in bed, exhausted but happy. Every hard moment, every scary moment, every moment of uncertainty, I would do it all again because it led me here to you, to this life. Me too, Harrison said, pulling her close. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emma Shaw. You and our children and this life we built together. I could not ask for anything more. But life, as it turned out, had more to give them. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, combining the two ranches into a larger operation that would support multiple generations. Margaret's art gained attention from a gallery owner in Denver, and she began selling her paintings, using the money to travel and see the world, always coming home with new stories and new inspiration. And Sarah's twins were followed by 3 more children, filling the Shaw family with another generation of love and laughter. Harrison and Emma grew old together, their hair turning gray and their movements slowing, but their love never dimming. They still sat on the porch every evening watching the sun set, still held hands when they walked, still found reasons to laugh together. They told their grandchildren stories about how they met, about the cold barn and the promise Harrison had made to keep Emma safe. And the children listened wide-eyed, thinking it was the most romantic story they had ever heard. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family gathered again, this time with 4 generations present. Harrison was 70 now, still strong but showing his age, and Emma was 63, her face lined but still beautiful. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard, and Harrison looked around at all of them and felt his heart overflow with gratitude. "I want to say something," he announced, raising his voice to be heard over the chatter. The crowd quieted, turning to look at him. 40 years ago, I made a promise to a scared young woman who had stumbled into my barn looking for safety. I promised her that I would keep her safe, and I have spent every day since trying to keep that promise. But what I did not know then was that she would save me right back. Emma, you taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope again. You gave me a family and a purpose and more happiness than any one man deserves. And I want everyone here to know that you are the reason all of this exists." He gestured around at the gathered family. Every person in this yard, every bit of love and joy and connection, it all started with you having the courage to run, and me having the wisdom to help you. So thank you, my love, for 40 years of being my partner and my best friend and the love of my life. Emma was crying, and so were most of the people there, and she stood and moved into Harrison's arms where she belonged. "You kept your promise," she said. "You kept me safe. And I promise to love you until my last breath, Harrison Shaw." They kissed, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and the celebration continued long into the night. But eventually, people began to drift away, heading to their own homes or to the guest rooms upstairs, and Harrison and Emma were left alone on the porch under the stars, just as they had been so many times before. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Emma asked. "In the barn." "I said a lot of things," Harrison replied with a smile. "You said you were going to keep me safe, and you said you did not break your promises." Emma looked up at him. "You kept that promise, Harrison. For 40 years, you have kept me safe not just from Marcus Foster, but from loneliness and fear and despair. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." "We gave it to each other," Harrison said, as he always did. "I could not have done any of this without you, Emma. You were my salvation as much as I was yours." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the crickets chirping, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the trees. It was the same as it had been 40 years ago, and yet everything was different. They were different, changed by time and experience and the life they had built together. Harrison thought about all the moments that had led them here, the fear in Emma's eyes when he first found her, the way his heart had started beating again when she smiled at him, the first time they had said they loved each other, their wedding day, the birth of their children, every laugh and tear and quiet moment in between. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. As the years went on, Harrison's health began to decline. He developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and eventually the doctor diagnosed him with a lung ailment, probably from years of working in all weather. He was 75 years old, and his body was simply wearing out. Emma nursed him with the same fierce determination she had shown in everything else, refusing to let him give up, but they both knew the end was coming. On a warm summer evening in 1929, Harrison sat on the porch with Emma beside him, watching the sun set over the mountains one last time. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren had been visiting all day, saying their goodbyes, and now it was just the two of them as it had been in the beginning. "I am not afraid," Harrison said, his voice weak but steady. "I've had a good life, Emma, the best life. And I know I am leaving you in good hands with our family." "I am going to miss you," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know how to be without you, Harrison." "You will figure it out," Harrison said, reaching for her hand. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Emma Shaw. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you did not just survive, you thrived. You built a family and a legacy, and you changed so many lives for the better. You will be fine without me." "But I do not want to be without you," Emma said. "I know," Harrison said gently. "But everything ends eventually, love. The important thing is that we had 46 years together, and every one of them was a gift. I am grateful for every moment, every laugh, every tear, every sunrise we watched together. And I will be waiting for you, Emma, when your time comes. I promise." He died peacefully that night, slipping away in his sleep with Emma holding his hand, and the community mourned the loss of a good man who had lived with integrity and love. They buried him on the ranch overlooking the valley he had loved so much, and Emma visited his grave every day, telling him about what was happening with the family, about the new great-great-grandchildren being born, about the changes coming to the world. Emma lived another 8 years after Harrison's death, long enough to see the Great Depression shake the country but not break her family, long enough to hold the newest generation of Shaws in her arms and tell them stories about their great-great-grandfather who had found her in a barn and promised to keep her safe. She lived long enough to know that the legacy she and Harrison had built would endure, that their love had created something that would last long after they were both gone. When Emma finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84 in 1937, surrounded by family, they buried her next to Harrison under the oak tree they had planted on their 10th wedding anniversary. The tree had grown tall and strong, its branches spreading wide to provide shade and shelter, much like the love Harrison and Emma had shared, had spread to nurture and protect multiple generations. At the funeral, Sarah stood before the assembled family and told the story of how her parents had met, of the cold barn and the frightened woman and the cowboy who had made a promise and kept it. She told them about the love that had sustained her parents through 46 years of marriage, about the example they had set for all of them about what real love looked like, patient and kind and enduring. "My mother and father taught us that love is not just a feeling," Sarah said. "It is a choice you make every day. It is showing up for each other, protecting each other, building a life together even when things are hard. They showed us that it is never too late to start over, that broken people can heal and become whole again, and that the right kind of love can save your life. She looked around at the crowd, at the dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Harrison and Emma Shaw. We are all here because my father found my mother hiding in his barn and promised to keep her safe, and because my mother had the courage to trust him. Their love created all of this, and as long as we remember them and honor their legacy by loving each other the way they loved each other, they will never truly be gone. The Shaw Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always remaining in the family, always serving as a reminder of what two people could build when they chose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else. The library Emma had started grew into a proper building that served the community for over a century, and her name was carved over the door so that everyone who entered would know who had given them this gift. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Wyoming mountains in shades of gold and red, people who walked past the graves under the oak tree sometimes felt a presence there, a sense of peace and love so strong it was almost tangible. It was Harrison and Emma, still together even in death, still watching over the family they had created, still keeping the promises they had made to each other so long ago in a cold barn on a winter night when everything had changed forever. Their story became part of the family lore, passed down through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that sometimes the person you least expect becomes the one who saves you, and that true love, the kind that changes everything, often begins with a simple promise: I will keep you safe.